Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's that time of week again, everybody's favorite segment, the power rankings. Before we jump into it, just got a quick announcement off the top. Next week, actually a couple days away on Thursday, I will be heading to Las Vegas for about 10, 11, 12 days. I'm going to be there playing the World Series of Poker. If you're in Vegas or in the area, follow me on Twitter. Maybe you'll be able to see where I'm at and we'll be able to meet up, say hi, whatever. I'm planning to do the power rankings. If you've been a member of this channel for the number of years, usually when I go to Vegas for the World Series, I take the weeks off, but the momentum's been great. And I'm going to give it a shot and try to do maybe like a live stream or just like a record in my hotel. It's not going to be as good as this. It's not going to be everything you guys are excited about, but it's going to be power rankings and it's still going to come out on the Sunday like it typically does. Of course, today we still have Houston and LA Dodgers. They're about to kick off the Sunday Nighter. And as everybody knows, we do this ranking right before the Sunday Nighter. So filming it now, most of the games are in the books. I think all of them are actually in the books, which is a little bit rare, but we're going to jump into it. Before I do, make sure you go down there, subscribe to the channel, guys. We are on our way to 1,000 subs. Getting super close. The subs have been pouring in over the past couple of weeks, and I love it, and I want to keep it going. So it's part of the reason why I'm doing the power rankings from my hotel room next week. Kicking things off, number 30, we got the same old Kansas City Royals. 1-2 against Detroit. They had a pretty good weekend. Like going 2-2 against the top Tampa Bay Rays. But one little week is not ready for me to forget what they've done for the past 2 months. I'm going to keep them at number 30 because right now, trajectory-wise, I don't like them being able to make up the ground on number 29. Number 29, Oakland, 0-3 against Cleveland, 1-2 against Toronto, and not really looking super good against Toronto. They did steal the one win. But when you're matching these two teams up, the A's have won the series that they've matched so far this season. They're going to have another matchup. We'll see how that goes. And I just think Kansas City's in a world of hurt. I think they're the one team that is like ruled out from being able to get a top draft pick because they've been doing so bad for so many years. I think the trajectory with Oakland heading to Las Vegas, maybe the future of this franchise is a little bit better than Kansas, but let's be real, they're really close, and number 28 isn't too far ahead. Colorado Rockies 0-3 against Cincinnati. They did beat the Angels over the weekend, but if you were paying attention, they lost 25-1 in the one game that they lost, but they won the series, having a run differential of 20 runs in between those three games and still winning the series. Not going to give them a big boost for that. Still, pretty clearly, number 28. I think it's pretty clear that these three teams are the bottom three. And this one's not too far ahead, but 27, 1-2 against St. Louis. They had a midweek game against Arizona. I guess it's a makeup game where they lost. And then they went 2-1 against San Diego. So kind of a 500 week. And that seems to be Washington, seems to be a little bit ahead of these three teams. Not much far ahead. Maybe we might see Washington start to make some moves up. We're starting to see some players on their team starting to show that, hey, we're in a new era of the Washington Nationals. Maybe we'll see them start to move up. I don't think they can be much lower than this. 26. We've got the New York Mets. Just a disastrous week for the Mets. Coming in this week, I already had them low last week on the power rankings. And then this week, they just continued to lose series. They go 1-2 against Houston. And they have a monster series. They have a chance to beat Philadelphia this weekend. Maybe show that they have some life. And they drop that series going 1-2 against Philly. Including the Sunday Nighter not the Sunday Nighter, but today's game, the Sunday game. They just blew it down the stretch. And Mets, got to be concerned. I think it's time to really think something's got to change here. Mets are way out of the playoffs and not looking like they're going to make it. 25. We've got the St. Louis Cardinals. 2-1 against Washington, and then they headed to London and went 1-1 against the Cubs. Winning week, technically, but we're talking about two teams that aren't really going anywhere. Maybe the Cubs are starting to get some momentum. Cardinals need to build off this. Right now, still in the basement. They've been down in this area for over a month and a half now, and they haven't shown anything to show that they got it. This National League Central is going to be really tight, and right now they're last. Next up, Detroit Tigers 2-1 against Kansas City. So in a week where they had a shot to close the gap, they lose the series to Minnesota over the weekend. And I don't know how many times the Tigers have been in this position where they've had a really rough start, playing a lot of American League East teams, having the worst record, then start to fight their way back. Maybe in a couple games, they're going to be the division lead, and then they just fall apart. And they just can't get the momentum going. I don't see a big win streak coming from this team. We saw the opposite, very large lose streak about a month ago from them. I don't see them being able to recover right now. They got a long way to go to be back in the playoff conversation, albeit all these teams are in the conversation, but they need a lot of work, including this team, the White Sox. 1-2 against Texas, 2-1 against Boston. So a 500 week against teams that are ahead of them in the wild card race. Texas division lead, not really wild card race per se, but they lose that series. And then they have a big series win against Boston. A team that maybe they match up pretty closely with. Both these teams were really scraping and clawing. They need these wins, and they need these wins against each other to be back in the playoff hunt. Not giving them too much of a boost. I need to see some consistency from the White Sox because we have not seen it at all for like 2 years. So until we see a couple weeks of some winning baseball, we're going to see them in the bottom half of the bottom rows here, and that's just going to be the case. Number 22. Got the Pittsburgh Pirates. It's been free fall mode for them. 0-3 against the Cubs early in the week. A big division rival that they just couldn't buy a win against. And then 1-3 against Miami Marlins over the weekend. A team that I hadn't given a whole lot of credit to. If you've been following me doing these week after week, Miami was down in the bottom row even a month ago. Took me a long time to start seeing them come around, and then seeing a big week from them. Being able to take 3 of 4 from Pittsburgh just kind of demonstrates that they are ahead of teams like the Pittsburgh Pirates and other central teams. And a lot of these middling teams we're going to get to, we're going to start talking about a lot of teams now that you could probably make arguments that interchange a lot of them. But the Pirates are just plain atrocious. I think they've won, one game out of their last close to 15. It's a world of hurt right now. After being such a great start to the season, they got a long way to go. Number 21, Seattle. Tough season for Seattle so far. They're flying high off last year, of course, making the playoffs. Losing both series this week. They lost the New York Yankees, and they lost on the weekend to Baltimore after a big opening win on Friday against Baltimore. They just can't close it out and can't get another win to make it at least a 500 week. Seattle, if you're not going to win these series, if you're not going to find sweeps along the way, you're just not going to make up the ground because this American League is too strong to not have winning weeks. And it just seems to be the story. A lot of 1-2 series for Seattle, and it's not looking good going long term. Number 20, we got the Chicago Cubs, 3-0 against Pittsburgh, 1-1 against St. Louis. The Cubs seem ripe for a breakout here. This is kind of where we're going to start talking about any of these teams going on a massive win streak. Cubs, I think, have the potential to really throw that together. This next 2 weeks, they kind of looked ahead of the Cubs' schedule. They play 4 series against teams that are borderline 500, but all of them are within the wild card playoff race. So if the Cubs can find some 600, 650 baseball over these next 2 weeks, we're going to see a big potential to see them boost up to the border of the playoffs in this power rankings. Number 19, welcome to the second bottom row, the San Diego Padres. 1-3 against San Fran. Just disastrous week for them, following up with a series loss to the Washington Nationals. You guys have told me I probably have held on to these Padres too long. Sure, on paper they look great. They're just not delivering, and this was just a prime example of what you guys have been saying all season long. I finally am like, all right, we got to drop them. The rest of the teams at least continuing to play 500 baseball, continuing to be scratching and clawing a little bit better than these Padres. These Padres are now in a division that San Francisco Giants, this winning streak, seemed to maybe come out of nowhere, have just kicked them way down. They're clearly in 4th in this division, and that is not a place you want to be right now, halfway through the season. Next up, Cleveland Guardians, number 18, 3-0 against Oakland. So taking care of business where they have to. 1-2 against Milwaukee. So a series where you want them to be able to win this one. It's against another team that's right there in the middle, right there. We're going to talk about them in a second, but got to be really happy with Cleveland taking care of business where you're going to have to. And this is going to be a a storyline for anyone in the Central, especially on the American League side. If you can beat the teams that are worse than you, especially in your own division, you're in the playoff hunt. And Cleveland showed it this week. Not to discount them. They're still a far way out. I think overall the division in my mind is even weaker than I've ever been talking about, but they've been the closest they are now up the power rankings, I think, all season. Number 17, Milwaukee. Just talked about how they beat Cleveland. It's a big turnaround after losing early in the week to Arizona 1-2. 500 week. Division's been a little chaotic all season long. I think Milwaukee went from having a pretty big stranglehold to, I don't know if they're even going to be in the playoffs at this point. Right there, trending down. So like, we got a story of like the middle here. A lot of these teams now on the bottom half have been trending down. We got a team like the Cubs who's trying to claw their way out. Another couple bad weeks from the teams ahead of them and a good week from the Cubs, you're going to see them skyrocket up here. So it's kind of the story of what the middle is like right now. Another team that's just kind of been trending slowly down is Boston. 1-2 against Minnesota, 1-2 against the Chicago White Sox. And Boston, while they've had success in their own division, they've been able to pick up wins against every team, including a big sweep against the Toronto Blue Jays. They haven't been able to build off of it. And this is a prime example week. They've struggled and they lost 2 series to the American League Central that just can't happen if you're going to make the playoffs. Last place in the American League East, no shot at making the playoffs. And right now that's Boston. And I don't see that changing. So they got number 16. Number 15, and we're repping their hat, 3-0 against Colorado before the win streak came to an end at 11 wins. They went 1-2 against Atlanta, although that series was epic. Super excited, repping their hat right now to celebrate it. They had a massive win streak. They almost passed the Rays for the longest one of the season, not quite, but you got to be excited with what this Reds team has put together over the past few weeks, especially with some of their young guys coming back. Votto's back. They're looking good. This division is looking wide open, and right now they're on top, and I think they might stay that way. Number 14, Minnesota. 2-1 against Boston, 2-1 against Detroit. I think even though they had a winning week against 2 of the lesser teams, I think they dropped them down a couple spots. I probably had them too high last week. I think a couple comments mentioned that. Might have responded to them agreeing. Minnesota's kind of 500, middle of the pack. I think the big story here is how close Cleveland now is into striking distance of them. We still got 2 other teams down here who realistically can get in there if the rest of the teams struggle. When they match up, it's going to be super important who wins those one. And right now, Minnesota's been beating Detroit, so at least keeps the gap stronger here. It's going to be interesting when Minnesota and Cleveland next play. Number 13, we got the LA Angels. 0-2 against the Dodgers, 1-2 against Colorado. We saw that massive game. We kind of touched on it already when I talked about Colorado. And this is not a week where the Angels really deserved a whole lot of credit. They had a pretty bad week, losing 2 to Colorado after putting up 25 in one of the games. Not great, and of course getting swept in a short 2-game series against the Dodgers. Angels don't seem to have what it takes to beat the top-tier teams. I think right now this is where we're going to start talking a little bit of a difference between the teams we've talked about so far and the rest of the teams. Angels just haven't been able to win series against some of those top teams, but they seem at other times to pick up sweeps along the way. It's very strange, and I do believe they're kind of on the borderline, probably won't make the playoffs. Number 12, some people might say I'm not giving them enough credit yet. I'm starting to be a little bit sold. I saw them go up against Toronto. They lost the series, but they opened up the first game with a massive win. I think it was 11-0, maybe 12-0. And then they gave them a little tight runs in the next 2 games. Almost took that series from Toronto. And then they had a nice bounce back on the weekend here, going 3-1 against Pittsburgh. Just massive. And I can't discount now that they're still playing about .550 baseball, but I still don't think they're as good as their record. I'm going to say it here, but it's starting to show that the rest of the teams that I've now put ahead of them, they're also not as good as I had first thought. So it's just like a little bit of both things coming together, trying to give Miami a little bit of credit. Looking over the standings and stuff, maybe I can see Miami sneaking into the playoffs now just based on how the rest of the teams are going. Number 12 is where we're going to start talking. This is like borderline playoff bubble atmosphere. Number 11, dropping quite a few spots. I got the Houston Astros. They did go 2-1 against the Mets. Everyone seems to be beating up on the Mets. There's a lot of injuries and problems going on in Houston. The rotation is nowhere near the depth it had last season with the injuries, with the loss of Verlander. Jordan Alvarez has been out for at least the past couple of weeks. I didn't look too much into it. I don't know when he's going to be back, but it's posing a problem right now. And Houston, they're just not competing the way you want to see them. Still a very strong team. I still expect them to make the playoffs, definitely when some of these guys come back. But they're not the powerhouse that they once were, that's for sure. Number 10, the Toronto Blue Jays, 2-1 against Miami, 2-1 against Oakland. So a winning week against two teams I expect them to beat, especially Oakland. We'd love to see a sweep there. Can't sweep them all. Toronto continues to show that they're a good team. I just haven't seen what I want to see. I haven't seen what I've seen from some of the teams ahead of them in terms of being solid, consistent all the time. The pitching continues to worry me with Toronto. They have a couple of guys in their starter rotation, but the rest of it worries me, and the bats get cold sometimes. They start to get a little bit cold. Division's tough. Toronto has been atrocious against the division, and that's what's holding them back right now. Number 9, Philadelphia Phillies, 0-2 against Atlanta, 2-1 against the Mets. So I think the Phillies are the highest ranked team with like the worst record, and before someone points that out, I understand that, but I do think they're a good team. And I know that they dealt with some injuries early on in the season, had a little bit of a slow start. We could call it a World Series hangover or whatever. We've seen them beat teams like the Blue Jays. We've seen them play the Blue Jays and win. They had a massive series this week. They almost took one from Atlanta, lost that one barely. They come back, they have a huge series win against the New York Mets, a team that they typically have trouble with, and kind of build that gap in that division to kind of show, okay, they're going to make the playoffs, whether they should be ahead of Miami. I think I want to see these two teams play a bunch more. We're going to see Miami play a tougher schedule over these next couple of weeks. I know they have the Yankees coming up. I know they have the Rays coming up. They're going to play a lot of these American League teams. I think their next 4 series are against American League teams, so we're going to see how that goes. Whereas the Phillies have played a few more than them, and I do think they're the better team. Number 8, Arizona Diamondbacks, 2-1 against Milwaukee. 1-2 over the weekend against San Fran, and they had that one middling game against Washington I talked about already. But the key here is 500. They went 500 against 2 teams that are pretty much playoff teams. One of them was against the hottest team potentially in baseball. If you haven't seen that, I made a video about the hottest teams in baseball right now. I made it this week. It'll be linked at the end of this one. But Arizona won 500, not winning against San Fran, so that held them back a little bit. But I'm still going to keep them a little consistent. 500 is kind of what I expect. And unlike a lot of other power rankings, I never quite said Arizona was going to be a top 5 team. I still think they're in this area. They're going to be a playoff team based on what we've seen. But they're not a kind of team that's just going to go on a massive win streak. I just don't see that in their roster. At the same time, I do think they're capable of, at minimum, winning 500. And then if they can pick up weeks after that where they win, that's why they're there. Number 7, we got the Dodgers, 2-0 against the Angels, 2-0 against Houston. Good week for the Dodgers and starting to show what they're capable of. If it wasn't for that massive beating that they took from the San Francisco Giants, I'd probably have them in the top row. But because of that, San Francisco Giants have taken the number 6 spot. And that's just wild. 3-1 against Arizona, 3-1 against San Diego early in the week, 2-1 against Arizona. We look at the series before that, 3-0 against the Dodgers. So what is that? 8-2 against their National League West opponents over the past 2 weeks. All supposed to be really top teams. San Francisco, one of the hottest teams that I've just been talking about. And I had to move them up. I just couldn't find a way to not. And realistically, there has some issues on this team. The rotation really only has 3 starting pitchers right now. We saw them play a bullpen game over the weekend. I looked at their depth chart. Seems like that's kind of what they're going to have to do consistently. I don't know if they're going to be able to hold this up, but right now I don't have any other argument to really put them below any of these other teams because they have the roster that can compete against all these teams. And they've shown it, and it's been consistent. And this home field advantage that they always seem to have in San Francisco has been working out for them. Giants sitting at number 6, and if you would have said this 2 months ago, they'd be at number 6, I would have called you crazy. But there they are. And number 5, New York Yankees, 2-1 against Seattle, 2-1 against Texas. Just continually I think, for the most part, to go under the radar a little bit. I'm sure if you're in New York or in the East Coast or whatever, Yankees are never under the radar. But I'll say it from the West Coast perspective, they've been flying under the radar, and it might be because of the division. Tampa Bay has been on top of the division all season long. Baltimore's been having a hot season, taking a lot of focus off the Yankees. The Yankees have continued to win baseball games. They've continued to keep themselves in a position that they're going to make the playoffs, and they have the roster to be very solid. And I thought earlier in this week, I think they were sitting at plus 800 to win the American League. I was shocked, and I had to book a little bit of a tick on that because I thought that was underpriced, and I think the Yankees are a sleeper at this point. Apparently, they shouldn't be a sleeper to win the American League, and I got them at number 5. Number 4, haven't been able to really move them. 1-1 against Tampa, 2-1 against Seattle. It's a little bit of one of those 5-game weeks. When teams play a 5-game week, they don't typically go too up and down. Baltimore continues to win. They showed a lot of comeback when they played Seattle this weekend. Had to be excited about that. They're just calling up their newest prospect again. This team seems to have a parade of prospects coming their way. They're going to be a big team, a big threat for years to come. Get used to it. I think we're going to see Baltimore in this top 10 at the very least for the next number of years. Number 3, we got Texas Rangers, 2-1 against the White Sox, 1-2 against the Yankees. Sure, they lose the series to the Yankees. They're on the road in that situation. The Yankees were a little bit farther down. The Yankees have had a lot of troubling times compared to the Rangers, in my opinion, over the season. There's arguments out there. Maybe the Rangers have had a much easier schedule. At the same time, I think the Rangers are the much bigger favorite to win their division. And in that case, if they're winning their division, they're likely going to get a first-round bye in the playoffs. That's a big advantage, especially when you're talking about this American League. Yankees win it. Of course, they got to go a little bit hotter. I don't know if the Rangers are holding on too tightly because these two teams are definitely right on their tail. I think when we're starting to talk baseball here, there's a pretty big divider here between that, but like in the 6, 7, 8, National League West is just open. These guys are going to be scrapping, and they're all playing super tough. And that leads us to number 2. And I hate to be the one to say this, Tampa Bay Rays are no longer number 1. Got to give them a lot of credit. Tampa Bay Rays have been number 1 all season long. I just couldn't keep them up there, definitely after a week of going 500 baseball and 2-2 against Kansas City. Early week, 1-1 against Baltimore. Arguably, I think Baltimore is in a position where if the records, I'm not, like you guys know, I don't really use records, but Baltimore is in a position where they've won the majority of the games against Tampa Bay. Could maybe be there. Tampa Bay has been struggling a lot in terms of their pitching, especially their bullpen, and giving up a lot of runs. It's been a big concern, but I still think overall the offense is a little bit stronger in Tampa Bay. I think their pitching matches up relatively closely, and Tampa Bay definitely has the aces over Baltimore. Tampa Bay's been in a little bit of a struggle. It's going to be important to see how Tampa Bay responds over the next 2-3 weeks. If they don't find a way to respond and they continue to play the baseball they've been playing for the past month, we're going to see them maybe start dropping down as low as 5, 6, 7, 8. Number 1, and can't really argue here. What was it? Atlanta Braves, 2-1 against Philly. 2-0 against Philly, and 2-1 against Cincinnati. And guys, they beat the hottest team in baseball, the Cincinnati Reds, 2-1. That was an epic series. If you guys didn't kind of check that one out, epic. I think all 3 games were 1-run games, back and forth all weekend long between those 2 teams. And then they took care of business. They beat both games in the Phillies series. So Atlanta continues to roll. They're one of the hottest teams as well in all of baseball. It's just been an epic season for Atlanta. They're starting to be consistent. And I think at this point, I've been talking about it for the past couple of weeks. It's long overdue, I think. Number 1, we got the Atlanta Braves up on top. Let me know what you guys think. Let me know where you would juggle things around and where you would agree with. Comments below. We keep the discussion going all week long on Discord. That's in the comments below as well. Any questions, etc., go in there. And guys, we will see you guys next time from Las Vegas, Nevada. We'll see you there. Thanks for watching. Peace out.